Well, hello there. My name is Ben, and I'm the Creative Services Coordinator at Addison Public Library. And today, we're going to talk about a really cool piece of software called Tinkercad. For those of you that don't know, Tinkercad is a basic 3D modeling software that's good for all ages, for kids and adults. And actually, it's something that would be really fun to do as a family as well. 3D modeling is the process of designing an image or a model with computer software, a 3D model that could potentially be sent to a 3D printer and printed out in the real world, something that you can physically hold in your hand and use for a real world purpose. Tinkercad is a basic software. There's much more advanced software out there that allows greater detail and flexibility in what you're able to create, but Tinkercad is a great launching point for anyone that has never done any 3D modeling before. So today, I'm going to show you the basics of Tinkercad, and we're just going to make a simple little object, and I'm going to show you how it all works, okay? So let's take a look. First, you're going to need to open your web browser. You're going to go to tinkercad.com, tinkercad.com. Type that up in your web browser's address bar, hit enter, and you're good to go. You're going to reach a screen that looks just like mine. If you don't have an account, that's okay. They're free to make, and it requires nothing more than an email address. So on the top right, you just have to click this button that says Join Now. Okay? So there's a spot for educators and students to make accounts. You don't need to worry about that. We're just going to click on Create a Personal Account, and it's going to ask you to sign up with email. So you're going to fill in what country you're from, your birth date, and when you hit Next, here, I'm just going to go ahead and put mine in really quick so that you can see the whole process. Okay, we'll hit Next. And then you're going to enter an email address and create a password. This is not asking for a password you already have. This is the password you'll be creating for your account. So once you go ahead and do both of those, click the check mark and you'll create an account. I already have an account, so I'm just going to go ahead and sign into mine, and we'll show you what this looks like. Okay, here we go. So once you sign into your account, this is the screen, and it shows you all the projects you have currently started and have in progress. I have one that I've already made, but we don't want to go and look at the one I've already made. We want to create a new design. So we're going to click this button right here that says Create New Design. Once we do this, it's going to take us to what's called the Warplane. This is our digital workspace where we're going to create, mold, and shape the object that we want to save and potentially print out with a 3D printer. So when looking at Tinkercad, there are two main areas that you should have your focus. There's the Warplane in the center of the screen. This represents the space where we're actually going to be designing our object. And on the right-hand side of the screen is our toolbox. And this is filled with all the different shapes that we're going to use to actually shape our object. So let me just show you how this works really quick so you can get an idea. Okay, so this is our Warplane. I can hold the right mouse button down and move my mouse around to kind of rotate around the plane itself to change the angles. And these shapes over here, all I have to do is click and drag one onto the Warplane. And now suddenly, I have a box on my Warplane. That's pretty cool, right? But not only boxes, I could take this cylinder, I can take this sphere, I can take this cone, and we can kind of just place them around. And look at that, I've already designed a number of different shapes, and we could go ahead and save this right now, and we would have a 3D print file with 4 different shapes that aren't really connected, and we could print this out and have these 4 shapes in our hands if we wanted to. But that's not super exciting. Tinkercad, while it gives us some very nice shapes, we can do more with them to create more advanced files and projects. So I'm going to draw a box over these shapes, and I'm just going to hit my delete key, and we're going to get rid of those. There are a lot of the same basic keyboard commands that you might be familiar with are accessible in Tinkercad, so feel free to use those. Like if you make a mistake, Control-Z will undo that mistake so you can, not fear that you ruined your entire project from one simple accidental click. So let's take one of the shapes from our toolbox and put it on the Warplane again so that we can see what different things we can do with it. I'm just going to take this box and put it on the work plane, and then I'm going to zoom in with my mouse wheel just so you can get a better look at it. So you can see that there are a bunch of different little boxes around the corners and sides of the shape. If I was to click and drag on any of those boxes, it'll kind of mold the shape into whichever direction I'm pulling it. So let me show you how that works. If I was to click and drag on this little black box here, I can pull it down and we can make the box longer. And I can drag it back up to make it shorter again, right? And I can let go, and now our box is much longer. It kind of looks like a shoe box now. I can click on it again though, and I can say, oh, you know, I don't really like that, so I want to drag it back over here. And we can do the same thing this way. And we could pull it out this way again if we want, or we can make it much more narrow. And then this box on the top, this will make it taller, and this will make it shorter. So we're changing the shape of the box just by clicking and dragging it, kind of like putty, right? We're just pulling it and pushing it into the shape that we want it to be. Now, you can see that if I were to click on one of these boxes, a little ruler pops up that shows us how big this object is in that dimension. So we can see that this is currently 16 millimeters tall. I don't know about you, but I'm not too familiar with millimeters. I'm much more familiar with the measurement of inches, as a lot of us are here in the United States. And thankfully, Tinkercad allows us to change how the grid is measured for us. So on the bottom right of the screen, we have this little button called Edit Grid. Okay, so I'm going to click on Edit Grid, and then this is going to bring up our grid properties. The units is right on the top. Currently it's millimeters, but I can click that and change it to inches. And now all of a sudden it's going to be so much easier for me to understand how big this is, right? So now we can see that it is currently 0.63 inches tall. Okay, well, I want it to be an even 1 inch tall. Okay, so I could click and drag and get it exactly where I want it to be. I can drag it all the way to 1, and now we know it's 1 inch tall. Or this little box that shows us how big it is, we can click in there and we can type in any number we want. So if we want to make this thing 5 inches tall, we just have to type in a 5 and hit enter. And boom, now it's 5 inches tall. So I actually have to zoom out here so that we can see the whole thing. Now it kind of looks like a skyscraper, right? It's pretty neat. So I can say, well, 5 inches is too tall. Let's make it 2 inches tall. That's much better. Perfect. So you can constantly change the size and dimensions of the shape at your leisure. Okay, we have a fresh box here, so let's take a look at some of the other options we have to manipulate our object here. We can see that there are a couple different icons that are double-ended arrows, right? So these are applied to each plane, the X, Y, and Z plane. And if I was to click and drag on one of these, we can actually rotate our object. So I could turn it 90 degrees if I wanted to, right? All I have to do is click and drag it. Now, the closer my mouse is to the object, it actually allows us to rotate in nice, clean sized chunks. So we can rotate it by 22.5 degrees, right? And this makes it very easy to rotate at 90 degrees or 180 degrees very easily, very quickly. If I move my mouse further away, it gives me the ability to kind of rotate it to any degree I want to. It's not snapping to convenient sizes that it thinks I might want. I could continue to rotate it until it was at, say, 57 degrees, right? Now it's exactly the angle I want it to be. Or just like with the size of the box, I could type in exactly how many degrees I want to rotate it. Now, just like the x-axis, we can rotate it on its side if we wanted to, or we can rotate it like this as well. So this just gives you the ability to move the object where you want it to be. Okay, so let's delete this and we'll get another box on here. And the last little icon on the shape itself that we want to look at is this black cone that's right above the box itself. Now this one, if I was to click and drag this up, it'll lift our box into the air, and I could move it down as well. And I could even move it into the plane itself. You can see that it's kind of underneath where the ground would be. Okay, we could even put it beneath the plane if we wanted to, but there's not a lot of reason to do that right now. Now, as you can see, when I raise and lower the shape, we have another little box showing us how much space we've moved the object into the air or into the ground. It's showing us how much we've raised or lowered it, right? So just like everything else, let's take care of this. I can move it up and down. Oh, sorry about that. We'll click here, we'll move it a little bit. Then the box comes up and we can say, oh, we want it to be 5 inches off the ground. Okay, now it's exactly where we want it to be. Right up in the air. Perfect. Okay, so let's delete that again. Okay, so we've taken a look at the different symbols around the shape itself that allow us to manipulate the object. But when we click on the object, we can see that another little window pops up on the right side of the screen as well. And this is going to give us even more customization for the shape. So we have 5 different slider options here that are going to allow us to change our object. Length, width, and height are the bottom 3 here. And when I slide these, we can see that it's going to do the exact same thing that I already showed you how to do. So this is an alternate option to clicking and dragging the boxes on the shape itself. You can do either one. It's just a different way to do it. And we can even click on these numbers here and change them just like we did before, okay? But there's 2 other slider options on the top of the window up here, radius and steps. So let me show you what happens when we drag radius to the right. We can see that it's kind of rounding out the edges. You see that? I can move it over here, and now we have a much rounder box, okay? Now steps is going to change how gradual that roundedness is for us. So let me move this to the left here. Okay, oh, you can see it's looking a lot more polygonal. All right, it's not as smooth and round, it's much more sharp and jagged. But we could drag this to the right and it smooths things out a lot. So you can just play around with it. You know, these are just different tools that Tinkercad gives you. It might not seem apparent why you would want to do that right away, but as you're creating a project, you might realize, oh, you know what? I want the corners to be more rounded. I decided, right? So we want it to look much smoother instead of pointed. So we've seen the different options we can do with one shape on our work plane, but let's take a look at what we can do with multiple shapes. So I'm going to take this box and I'm going to take, let's say this cylinder, okay? We have 2 different objects on our work plane. We're able to drag them inside of each other, okay? These are just representations of 3D models. So we can put them inside of each other like this, okay? Now you might say this looks kind of weird. Well, it does look kind of weird. I don't exactly know what I'm making, but we're just gonna go for it for the purposes of our example, okay? So now we have both shapes into one another, and it's kind of creating this one shape, right? We have this box with this rounded top going over it, but you can see that these are still 2 different shapes, right? We have a red box and we have an orange cylinder. If I wanted to make this one shape, I do have the power to do that. So with my mouse, I can draw a box over both shapes, or I can click on each of them independently with Shift. I could hold Shift and click the cylinder and then click on the box, and now both of them are selected. And you can see on the top right, it even says shapes 2 in parentheses, which means we have 2 shapes currently selected. And right above where it says shapes 2, there's this little icon called the group icon. So we can click on this or click Control G on your keyboard. That's the keyboard shortcut. And this, when we click on it, is going to turn our 2 shapes into one shape. Wow, you can even see that the red went away and now they're both one color. That's Tinkercad's way of saying this is one shape. Okay, so now I can click and move this around, and I don't have to worry about accidentally pulling the box out of the cylinder or vice versa. And I can even manipulate the shape however I want, because now it's just one object. That's pretty cool, right? So you can think of all sorts of different things you can do with that, with all the different shapes that Tinkercad has for us. Now, let's say, oh, you know, I thought this was a good idea, but this actually turns out not to be what I wanted. Well, don't fear, because we can reverse this. So we could just keep hitting Control Z on our keyboard at this point. But let's say you're much further along in the project and you want to, you know, revert the changes you made and make them separate objects again. So with the object selected, on the top right again, right next to the group button, is the ungroup button. If I click that, you can see that now our shapes have separated and I can take our box away from our cylinder. Okay, so now that these objects are separated from one another again, I want to show you another way we can combine shapes with each other. But instead of adding them to each other, we're going to use shapes to delete space from other shapes. Let me show you what I mean. Okay. So do you remember that little window on the right side of our screen that allows us to move these sliders up and down, right? To change the shape of the object? Above the sliders, we can see that there are two different options. There's solid and there's hole. Right now, both of these objects are solids. They represent actual physical material. But for either of these objects, let's take the cylinder for example. We'll click on the cylinder. We can choose hole instead of solid. So with hole selected, you can see that our cylinder, it becomes transparent. We have these kind of gray lines going all around it just to show you that this is representing empty space. This is negative space. It looks like there's something there, but anything that we group this with is going to delete whatever is touching this empty space. So let me show you. I'm going to take this hole of a cylinder and kind of just move it over the corner of the box. Okay, so now, you know, they're both just hanging out, touching each other like that. But again, if I use my mouse to select both of them or hold shift and click them each one at a time, we can see we have two shapes selected. Okay, and just like before, we're going to click the group button on the top, and this is going to combine both objects together. So let's see what happens here. Okay, so you can see that it deleted the corner of the box because that was where our hole was touching. It kind of looks like we took a bite out of this big old box here, right? So now we have this shape, and we can change this exactly how we please, just like before. And we can see that that kind of bite mark is always going to be there because that's just part of the shape now. That's what it looks like. All right. So again, if we maybe don't like this or we want to modify the hole that we used to cut this corner of the box away, we just select the shape again and we can click ungroup. And then just like before, we can remove the hole. We can replace it with a different sized hole or a different shape, whatever we want. Whatever you do in the software, it might look like, you know, you made a choice and it's permanent, but the software gives you a lot of flexibility so you can go back, make adjustments, or fix mistakes. Okay, so let's say you want to stack objects on top of each other. How do we do that? So let's take a look. Let's take a cylinder and a box. Let's say we wanted to put this cylinder on top of the box. Well, there's a couple different ways we can do that. We can click on the cylinder and we can grab our little cone and we can lift it up into the air, right? And we can get it to the point where we think, oh yeah, it's lined up just nicely. And we can drag the cylinder right on top of the square. And now we have a cylinder on top of a square, right? So you can see there's a couple different ways to figure this out, right? So we know if we look at the shape of our square that it's 1 inch tall, okay? When we lift our cylinder up, the little box on the bottom right here, is showing us how much we've lifted it. So since we know that the box is 1 inch tall, we know that we have to raise the cylinder 1 inch into the air. So we can see that now it's a 1, and I can drag it over perfectly, right on top of the box. And it's exactly where we need it to be. So that's one way you can go about doing it. But sometimes you want it to just go quicker. You don't want to have to measure it and figure it out. And there's a very easy way to do this. So let's undo a couple times with Control Z on our keyboard. Okay. On the top right, there's an option called Warplane. Okay, this is the Warplane tool. As you can see, we are currently working on what's called a workplane. This is our blue workplane where all of our shapes live. Okay, but if we click on this workplane tool, this allows us to create a temporary workplane. in our project, so that when I create this plane, I can place objects on top of this instead of our already existing blue work plane. So take a look at this. We can see that as I move my mouse around now, it's asking where do you want to put the plane? Well, you can press it up against any side of an object and create a new work plane. So what if I put it on top of the box? Okay, now you can see we have this orange work plane. I'm going to zoom out just so you can see. And if I move to the side, you can see that we still have our original blue work plane. That's never going to completely go away. But we have this temporary orange one that lives on top of the box. So now, if I were to drag a shape from the toolbox, I could put it right on top of this work plane, right? And I could take this sphere and I can put it over here. I can take this roof and put it over here. And now you can see we have all these shapes that are perfectly lined up with the top of the box. So this makes it very simple and easy to put shapes where we want them to go. And so let's delete these really quick, and we can even delete the cylinders. Now, if we want to get rid of the work plane, all we have to do is click on the icon again and click on the work plane and it'll disappear. But let's say we wanted to put something on the side of the box. It's just as easy as it was before. We click on the work plane icon, and now we're going to place the work plane on the side of the box. So I'm just going to click right here on its side, and now you can see we have this vertical work plane. Okay, so this is just showing us where our shapes are going to go when we put them on the work plane. Okay, so I can take this sphere and I can put it right here on our orange work plane. And now we can line it up perfectly with the side of the square. And it's pressed up right against it, just where we want it to be. And to get rid of the work plane, again, we're just going to click on the work plane icon on the top right, and then we're going to choose where we want to put our work plane, which is where it was before on our original level here. So I'm just going to click where it was before, and we're back in business. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at what we can do to the shapes in Tinkercad, let's look at a few of the other tools that Tinkercad has available for us. Okay, so on the right side of the screen, again, is our toolbox. We can see there's a number of different shapes here. We have hearts, we have rings, we have, things that look like 20-sided dice from Dungeons and Dragons, and we have actual dice as well. So there's all these pre-made shapes that we can manipulate and use in our projects. Okay, so I'm going to highlight and delete these. Now there's one here that is pretty cool. It's called text. Okay, so I can drag text onto our work plane, and you can see it just says text. It's not super exciting, but we could change it to say whatever we want, actually. So with the text selected, we have our little window here on the right side again, and we can see that there's a field called text. And right now, it says text, but I can delete that and change it to say whatever I want it to. So let's say Addison Public Library. Great. That's super cool. So now we have this 3D model of the name of our library. Okay, but you can also change it to your name, for example, right? We could make a keychain or a nameplate. We can type whatever we want and add it to our project. So this is just a quick, easy way to get text into your project. And we even have a few different fonts here. There aren't a lot of options, but at least it's more than one, right? So think about that, and you can do whatever you want with the text. Okay. We have up here, if we click on where it says basic shapes, there's a number of different toolboxes that we can look at. We have text and numbers, right? So we can just drag a single letter onto our work plane if we want, like a J or a K, JK. Just kidding. Let's get rid of those. All right. We have different shapes that might be good for engineering or tinkering. Okay. We have different characters. So there's this little guy who looks like he's kind of waving. We could take this ice cream cone, right? We can put that there, and we could raise this ice cream up and move it over into his hand so it looks like he's showing off his ice cream to everyone, bragging about how great it is, okay? So we can do a bunch of different things like that as well. So Tinkercad gives us a whole bunch of pre-selected shapes that we can work with. Okay, so there's one last thing in our basic shape toolbox that I want to show you, and that's this option right here called Scribble. And this might be my favorite part of Tinkercad, because this allows us to draw our own shapes that we can use in whatever way we want, just like all the other shapes. So check this out. I'm going to click and drag Scribble onto the work plane, and we can see it looks just like the icon in the toolbox, but when I let go, it brings us to another screen. And on this screen, we're actually able to draw. Our mouse cursor is effectively now like a pencil or a paintbrush. So if I click with the left mouse button and move it around, I'm going to draw on this new window. I like spooky things. Halloween, for example, is my favorite holiday. October is my favorite month. So I'm just going to draw a cute little spooky ghost. Okay, so we're just going to take our mouse and kind of give him a nice rounded top. On the bottom, we have maybe the bottom of the sheet, because ghosts kind of just look like people wearing white sheets, right? And we can give him some spooky eyes like this. And now we have ourselves a little ghost, and we can see him on the preview icon. So I can click done, okay? And now we can see that we have our little ghost here on the work plane, which is pretty neat. And just like all the other shapes, now I can make it very tall, I can make it very short, or I can make it bigger. I can do anything I want with it, because it's just another shape from our toolbox. So we've talked about a number of different things that we can do in Tinkercad, from making shapes to reshaping shapes to combining shapes and deleting shapes and drawing our own shapes. There's so many different things we can do. So let's actually make something. Let's make something very simple that we can do together just in the course of this video. Okay, so please feel free to follow along if you would like, or you can just watch it first, follow along later, and pause throughout so that you can catch up with what I'm doing, okay? So we have our blank work plane. So what should we make? How about a keychain, right? Keychains are useful. You have your ring of keys with your house key, your office key, your car keys. Well, what happens if you lose your keys? Well, maybe it would be a good idea to make a little keychain with your name on it. So in case you lose it at work, you know, maybe someone says, oh, hey, this is Ben's keychain, right? This is his key ring. So I know to give it back to him. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but, you know, it's better to be prepared, right? Just like Scar from The Lion King. Okay, so let's make a little keychain. How do we want to do this? Well, how about we just take a box, okay? This is a good foundation because we want our keychain to be long and flat and kind of rectangular in shape. So we're going to take our box, and then we're just going to make it shorter, maybe down to 1/4 of an inch tall, okay? And then we're going to take the side box, we're going to drag it to the right, maybe to about 3 inches in length. That sounds like a good size for a keychain. Okay, so we have the foundation of our keychain, but no one really wants just like, you know, a rectangle in their pocket. It's sharp and jagged and pointed, right? So let's smooth the edges out a little bit so it feels a little nicer in our hands when we're holding it. So we'll click on our box, and I'm just gonna mess around with the radius, and we can see that it's gonna smooth the edges out, make them more rounded. And I'm just gonna move it until I get somewhere that I like, right? So there's no specifics here. I'm just messing around until I see something that I like. Ooh, here we go. So now you can see it no longer looks like a rectangle. It kind of does, but it's much different than it was before. And this should hopefully feel a lot better in our hands when we're actually holding it, okay? So we have the basic shape for our keychain completely done. So now we need to start making some adjustments to it so that we can actually use it and design it to look like something kind of cool with our name on it, right? So we need to make a hole in the keychain because we need something for the key ring to go through and hold it, you know, with the rest of our keys. So we're going to make a little hole on one end of the keychain. On the top right of the toolbox, we have a cylinder hole, so we can just drag this over here, right? But this is too big of a hole, right? If we cut a hole into our into our keychain like this, it would be pretty ineffective. So we're just gonna reshape it. I'm gonna click and drag the corner and make it much more narrow and smaller, right? That looks pretty good. 1/4 of an inch by 1/4 of an inch. Okay, and I'm gonna put it on the end of our keychain just like that. And that looks pretty good to me. That looks like a nice size hole that a key ring could go through very easily. So I'm gonna highlight both shapes by drawing a box around both of them. And we can see we have shapes 2 on the top right, which means we have 2 shapes selected. And then I'm gonna click the group icon. We click that, and there we go. It cut a hole into our keychain. Perfect, right? So at this stage, we could save this and we could print it out and we would have this thing that looks like a keychain, but it doesn't really have anything special or unique about it, right? Which is fine. If that's what you want, absolutely, please do whatever you would like. But I want my name on this, so let's figure out how we can do that. Well, I can take the text and we can put this on our keychain, but I want it to be right on top of the keychain itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our Warplane tool that we used from before. I'm going to click that and click it right on top of the keychain. So now when I drag the text shape, it's going to be pressed up right against the top of our keychain. It's too big right now though, so let's make this much smaller. I'm going to hold the shift key while I resize this so that we keep the aspect ratio the same so that it looks nice and not stretched out. Okay, that looks like a pretty good size, but obviously I don't want it to say text. I want it to say Ben. So I'm going to click over here in the text field and just retype it until it says Ben. Perfect. My name's nice and short, so it fits on the keychain. If I wanted, I could do my full name, Benjamin. And that actually does look pretty nice as well. But I'm not going to do that because I want to put something else on the keychain along with my name. So it's not just my name, but something a little personal or unique to me. Okay, so let's change this back to Ben because Benjamin's just too long for what I want right now. I'm going to delete the Jammin and leave the Ben. Okay, so I want my name to kind of go onto one side because I want to put something next to my name to make this a little more unique and personalized for me. So we have Ben on one side, but you can see, oh, actually, let's get rid of our Warplane as well, the new one. We don't need our new Warplane because we already put our shape down. So I'm just going to get rid of that. So now when I move my camera to the side, we can see that this is protruding out quite a bit. It's protruding out much more than I would like it to. So I'm just going to go ahead and make my name shorter. So that is quite a big jump. It's making us snap between an 1/8 inch and 0 inches because our grid is set to snap an 1/8 inch. So I'm going to change this. Okay, let's make it much smaller. Actually, I can turn snapping off so that I can drag it to the exact size that I want it to be. So let's just make it a little bit, right? That looks pretty good. So we can still see that it says Ben, and there is some depth to it, but not enough where it's going to get caught on anything or be distracting. And actually what we could do as well is we could click on my name and we could turn it into a hole, right? And then what we can do is lower it into our keychain, right? So now we have a hole in the shape of my name inside of our keychain. So if I was to select both of these shapes, I could click the group icon, and now it's going to cut my name out of the keychain. So now we don't have anything protruding out of the keychain at all. It's indented into the shape itself. So this makes it a much cleaner, nicer looking object. But you can do whichever one you want. You can have it carved into the shape of the keychain or coming out of it like it was before. And let's say I do want it to be coming out of it like it was before. I can just click undo a couple times, right? And now it's a hole above the keychain, but I can click on that and turn it back into a solid if I like this better. And maybe I do for right now. Okay, so our keychain is looking nice. It has my name on it, but we have way too much empty space. I could make it shorter if I wanted to better fit my name, but I actually want it to be a little bigger, and I want it to be bigger because I want to put something personal on it, something unique that I made to give it a little more personal flair. So, do you remember that ghost that I drew earlier? I'm going to draw another little ghost to put next to my name because, again, I like spooky things, and it'll just make the keychain much more special to me having something that I drew on it. So we're going to use our Scribble tool, but first we're going to put another temporary work plane on top of the keychain because we want what we draw to go flush on the top of the keychain, so it's pressed on top of it. So I'm going to take the work plane tool and just click next to my name here, and you can see we have our temporary work plane right up against the top of the keychain, and I'm going to drag the Scribble tool right here on top of it. So now I'm just going to draw our little ghost friend one more time. Okay, and we're going to give him his little ghost sheet feet. Okay, and we'll give him some eyes, just like so. Okay, maybe I didn't like how that eye came out, so I'm just going to click the little undo arrow and draw another one. And boom, there we go. We have our little ghost, and we can see on the preview how it looks and where it's going to show up. And then I'm going to hit done. And actually, before I hit done, I don't like this little edge that's like that on the side, so I'm just going to use the erase tool to make that a little smoother. Now I'm going to hit done. And we can see we have our ghost right on top of our keychain, exactly where we wanted it to be. So let's get rid of this work plane, and now we can start working with our ghost. So I want it to be the same thickness as our name, right? So I'm going to click on our name, and if I click on the little height box, we can see it's 0.04 inches tall. So we're going to make the ghost the same height. We're going to click on the little height box, and then click in the box, and type in 0.04. And now it's the same thickness as our name, but it's too big to fit on the keychain. So I'm just going to hold shift and click and drag the corner to make them smaller. Okay, how's that? Perfect, look at that. Okay, so now we have our nice looking keychain, we have our name on it, and we have a little picture that we drew. But I realized something as I was making this. Because we rounded the edges of our rectangle, it actually makes it so that our shapes on top of it aren't perfectly flush with the top of the keychain. You can see that the ghost, for example, because it's so much bigger than my name, it's actually going over the rounded portion of our keychain. So I've decided that I think I do want to make this a hole. So we're going to cut it into the keychain itself instead of having it stick out on top of it. Now, if you decided not to round the edges of your keychain out, this might not be an issue for you, and you can go ahead and continue or skip this portion of the video. But for me, I want to make these holes instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my name, and we're going to make it a hole. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the ghost. Okay? So these are, right now, 0.04 inches thick. You can see I click on the shape and then click on the height box, and we can see it's 0.04 inches tall. So I like this size. That's about how much I want to cut into the keychain itself, how much I want to carve out. So I'm going to click on the little black cone that lowers and raises it. All right, so I'm going to click on that, and in the box I'm going to type negative 0.04, and this is going to lower it perfectly into our keychain. And I'm going to do the same thing with the ghost. We're going to grab the little black cone, and we're going to lower it just a little bit to make the box appear, and then I'm going to change it to negative 0.04, just like our name. Okay, well, this is kind of an issue, huh? So you can see that this isn't working as nicely as it did for our name. Why is that? Well, it's because things aren't perfectly in sync with one another. We rounded the edges of our rectangle, and we're using a drawn shape that's kind of going closer towards the edges than the text shape did. So in order to fix this, all I have to do is make our ghost thicker. So we can see that the ghost is still selected, so I can grab the little icons and symbols to change the shape. So I'm gonna grab the height box and I'm just gonna raise it up, okay? So we know that we lowered the ghost 0.04 inches into the keychain, but now we've raised him to be a little thicker just to make sure that he's cutting all the way through so that that top layer is cut through and we're getting the engraving into the keychain that we want to. Okay, so it doesn't matter that the hole is sticking out so much more above the keychain, because when we group these together, it's just going to completely disappear. It's empty space anyway. It's not cutting through anything. So let's go ahead and do that, okay? I'm going to use my mouse and I'm going to draw a box over the keychain. We can see we have 3 shapes selected. Shapes 3, we have the keychain, our name, and our little drawing. Now I'm just going to click the group icon, and it's going to cut those holes into the keychain, and boom, there we go. Now we have my name and we have our little drawing of the ghost, and now it's one object. So we did it. We made our little keychain. Really quick, now that our object is completed, I want to show you how we can save this into a file that you can keep on your computer for saving, for transferring, sending to someone else, or sending to a 3D printer so that you can have it printed and actually use this thing. So, on the top left of the screen, you can see that we have these words, Brilliant Migolo Jofo. This is actually the name of the project that Tinkercad gave to us when we started. They like to use these just very silly and weird sounding names as default names instead of something boring. So I'd prefer not to have this called Brilliant Migolo Jofo. So what I can do is I can click where the name is, and now I can type something new. So I'm going to call this Ben's Spooky Keychain. And then I'll hit enter, and there we go. So now the project is named, so when we save this onto our computer, it'll be saved as this name instead of the one before. So in order to save, we have to click this export button on the top right of the screen. We click that, and then it asks us what file format we'd like to save this as. So this is going to depend on your needs. For us at the Addison Public Library, we use .stl files because this is what our 3D printing software prefers to use. You might want to use a .obj. You can also save it as a .svg for something like laser cutting. This is all going to depend on what you need, but for me, I'm going to download this as a .stl. Okay, so I click that, and then I'm kind of in the way here, but you can see on the bottom left of the screen, Google Chrome has downloaded the file, Ben's Spooky Keychain, and I can open this file on my computer, and we can look at it right here. And now this file can be attached to an email, saved on Google Drive, or sent to a 3D printer, and it'll print this object exactly as we designed it. So, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and learning the basics of Tinkercad. I hope that you continue to explore Tinkercad so you can learn more about what this software has to offer and learn more about what you're capable of making yourself. If you have any questions or you want to talk more about 3D printing or Tinkercad, please feel free to reach out to the Addison Public Library, and we're here to help and walk you through this more in depth. Okay? And for our members, please stick around. I'm going to put a link over here somewhere on the screen so you can watch me explain how to take this 3D file that we just made and then submit it to the library so that we can print it out for you to actually take home with you. Okay? Thank you again for joining me. My name is Ben, and I'll see you next time.